journey beyond imposter syndrome. This is where I invite you into a space where high achievers and spiritual leaders converge to redefine success and self-worth. By sharing transformative stories and engaging with thought leaders, this podcast serves as a roadmap for navigating the complexities of imposter syndrome. It's an intimate look into overcoming personal barriers tailored for those who value wisdom, leadership, and intuition in business and life. Join me at the Humble Warrior Podcast with Alani Bankhead. Welcome, you guys, to the final episode of Season 1 of the Humble Warrior Podcast. I'm your host, Alani Bankhead, and I'm so tickled. I can't believe we are 1 year into when I launched this podcast. And honestly, you guys, I created this platform to give people free resources to help them understand that their imposter actually holds the seeds of their greatest success and joy. I had 6,400 downloads as of this recording, and I'm not quite sure what I expected, but I really am just overwhelmed that 6,400 of you chose to listen to the stories and the encouragements and the tips on how you can make your imposter work for you. So today I'm actually going to recap the top 10 episodes of the Humble Warrior Podcast. But first and foremost, if this is your first time with us, I want to explain real quick what imposter syndrome is, because actually a lot of people don't know, which is kind of crazy to me. So imposter syndrome is a term coined initially in the 60s or 70s. Actually, it was known as imposter phenomenon at the time. And these two researchers discovered this concept that there are certain individuals that feel like they're not good enough or qualified for the work, the title, the accolades that they've achieved at work, and that eventually people around them are going to figure out that they're not good enough for the job, the title, the accolades, the awards, the positive feedback, and that when they are found out as the imposter, bad things are going to happen. And so this season, I've tried to alternate episodes between solo episodes with tips that I give or tools that have helped my clients with episodes where we have guests where we can talk about stories on that really messy middle piece that we can diagnose and dissect and talk through to give you tips and encouragement that you too can actually make your imposter syndrome work for you. So without further ado, Number 10 was actually episode 12, The Humble Data Warrior with Nadine Rodriguez. So guys, data is power. And some of you might think data is dorky, and a lot of people ignore it because they think it's boring or inconsequential and small. But honestly, data is super powerful. I know this firsthand from the work that I do in the law enforcement and intelligence spaces. Oftentimes when I'm working trafficking cases or whatever, sex crimes, a lot of people have assumptions about what's actually happening in the space. And it's not until we start gathering data that we discover that 9 times out of 10, what they think is happening isn't, and the crime is being centered in another area. So data can be incredibly powerful. And even though some people might think it's boring, the reality is that if you want to be the very best at what you do, you need some kind of data. And what I love about Nadine's story, though, is that what she illustrates is your magic is actually at the intersection of all of your interests. Nadine actually was previously a corrections officer. So she was in prisons, guarding people who were convicted of crimes, not the average dream job that people would think about. And she really ended up there on accident. But what she now knows and understands is that it was the launching pad to her greatest gifts. And so through talking to different inmates, she discovered that actually the crimes that they committed, a lot of them could have been prevented if they'd addressed the trauma responses that folks were experiencing. And actually, she was able to use data now to understand how crime and trauma intersect. And there's a bit of an epidemiologist kind of model, a medical model that she uses to identify, hey, if we can focus mental health services in these very high trauma areas, we can also minimize crime in those areas, which obviously has reverberating effects in society. It means we have less people in jail. We're using less tax dollars to house those individuals. Obviously, there's less crime, right? And so sometimes you might feel a little bit embarrassed that you're not doing such a sexy job. But if you're not satisfied right now, if that resonates with you, I'm here to tell you, Nadine and I both, that one day you're going to be so thankful for that experience because it will actually inform the work you were always meant to do. And so you're going to want to check out this clip where Nadine talks about the truth about her job in corrections. And if you want to learn more about it, obviously you can access the episode on Spotify or YouTube. Check this episode clip out.
I'm so glad I ended up in that job. Even though it caused a lot of mental health issues and whatnot, but even that was pretty much like looking back was great because it started that journey of me looking more into like trauma and trauma informed approaches. And now I'm starting to dive more into the neuroscience of it and what your brain actually does when it comes to trauma. So I'm really geeking out on this, as you can tell. But yeah, I've learned so much through that journey that I could have never learned if I wouldn't have went through that.
Number 9, we actually have episode 2, which is the humble psychological operations warrior with Colonel Eric Kreitz. Eric was actually the number 1 psychological operations commander in the Army, and then he tried to unalive himself. On paper, he looked amazing, but inside he felt like a complete fraud. He gives this really crazy story about when he got this evaluation that said he was the number 1 and how he was their number 1 pick for command at the next level. And the reality was he was deep in his alcoholism. And honestly, guys, I can really relate to Eric's story. Substance abuse and escapism and avoiding reality are all symptoms of imposter syndrome because imposter syndrome leads to perfectionism, which leads to burnout. And we're constantly chasing the achievement in order to get external validation that we do belong, that we do matter, that we do have value. And I love the way that Eric shares his story because it's a really powerful example of he was literally at the top of his game, but felt at his very worst. And so, whether it's alcohol in our cases, which I leaned on very heavily when I was working human trafficking and child sex crimes cases, I don't drink anymore because I realized that those types of cases and alcohol don't mix. But maybe your vice is a little bit different. It might be food, it might be Netflix, it might be substances or sex. Either way, when we're trying to avoid reality, that's an indicator that there's probably some imposter phenomenon happening. What I really love the most about Eric's story is that he shares it so that he can help people now use their weakest moments as a launching pad to even greater success and fulfillment. So you're going to start seeing a theme that in people's worst moments or at their weakest is actually when their superpower is launched. The question is, how do you want to respond to the worst moment of your life? And Eric provides a lot of really incredible encouragement, insight, and inspiration, frankly. If you're at your lowest moment, you're definitely going to want to check out episode 2 of the Humble Warrior podcast with Colonel Eric Kreitz.
So in 2018, I was in command of a battalion, psychological operations, young men and women. And it was at that point where I received the best evaluation I'd ever gotten in my career. This was May of 2018. It said, Eric is the number 1 psychological operations battalion commander. Eric is the number 1 one of 19 lieutenant colonel. Eric is the top choice to command at the next level. And my first thought, Alani, was if the general only knew who I really was, if the general only knew that I'm not the person that he's writing about here on this paper. And that was where imposter syndrome really hit. And a lot of thoughts of, man, if he found out, then I'm ruined. If people only knew what was really going on. And upon reflection, again, a lot of this came after reflection, was what is going on was I'm leaning really hard on alcohol. I'm only here because I got lucky and I've been surrounded by people who have lifted me up. When people tell me, hey, you're doing a great job, it's because I'm not really doing a great job and they feel sorry for me. And they're trying to bring me back up. And so just all this negative talk and all these things that were coming into my head that simply weren't true. And so after that evaluation, I started drinking a blackout every night and just trying to make that feeling of I'm not good enough go away.
Number 8 for the first year of the Humble Warrior podcast, we have episode 10, the Humble Air Force Pilot Warrior with Lieutenant Colonel Jess Ruttenber. So Jess was told she couldn't fly. She was too short to sit in the ejection seat of the aircraft. What they were telling her actually was, you don't fit in this world. And her imposter was so loud in her head, but there was something in her that said she deserved to be there. She drove all over the regional area where she was living to find an aircraft that could fit her, and she finally did. And what was crazy was that she did all this work to overcome her imposter, and it wasn't actually until after she graduated from pilot training that her imposter got even louder, because she realized that she actually was often the only female in the room. And so feeling othered was very common. The reality is that she's had an incredible career. She's an incredible pilot. She's had such a powerful impact on flying in this country. She's changed laws in the United States, and she now advocates for marginalized groups to get access to flying because flying is clearly so important to her. The imposter statement that this world wasn't made for you is what she uses to make the flying world accessible to anybody who wants to fly. So she's a very powerful example of when your imposter pops up, it actually means that you're on the right track. But what we teach you on the podcast and through my private coaching is to learn how to harness your imposter to work for you. If this resonates with you, you're going to want to check out this clip of Lieutenant Colonel Jess Ruttenber talking about her journey to harnessing her imposter to work for her.
I thought I wasn't smart enough with the academic stores. I think the height thing I just thought was BS. Because I didn't realize it was like a gender thing yet. I just had no idea the magnitude it was. But you think I did all that and made it through pilot training, I would have fixed my imposter syndrome. But that's like where it started getting even worse, because now I am one of the only women that I see in the room. And now I'm late rated, which means I'm trying to play catch up on flying hours and stuff that I was in cyber. So I always, in my mind, every time I would start falling behind, I always thought, oh, it's because I'm late rated. And I would come up with some excuse, and I would have some kind of cognitive distortion to make up a reason. And the truth was, I'm not sitting here boo-hoo, but the system wasn't designed for me. And when there's enough microaggressions against you, it sends a subtle message that you don't belong here. And for me, that meant I wasn't good enough. And I still, to this day, like, I call myself a recovering perfectionist because I keep setting the bar so high for myself, I'll never reach it.
Number 7, we have episode 50, The Humble Entry-Level Warrior with Megan Rehard. So Megan is such a special client, and it took me forever to get her on the podcast. So Megan, if you're listening, number 7 girl, I'm just saying, you should have said yes months ago. All that to say, for the person who has applied to a million jobs, or if they're entry level and they're just not finding anything, this is such a powerful episode, and why I kept begging Megan to come on the podcast, because I've known Megan for many years now. We actually came to know each other really randomly or coincidentally, wink, wink, where I was working human trafficking and child sex crimes cases. And it turned out she'd written the only thesis I could find on the topic in that jurisdiction. And guys, she was an undergrad. But the reality was that I understood I didn't need somebody to be older and wiser than me to give me the knowledge. She had the data, she had the information that I needed to make better informed decisions on where we needed to focus our operations on. So I've followed Megan for a really long time. She's had such an insane first 5 years in the job market, and you're going to have to listen to the episode to get all the tips. But I will actually highlight to you, she was a police recruit who applied to over 70 jobs, and she kept getting rejection after rejection. And this is something I hear a lot from a lot of you guys that are saying, I'm trying to get into an entry-level job in the field that I want, and they keep telling me I need more experience, but hello, it's an entry-level position, right? So Megan 100% understands your pain because she's been there. And I remember getting text messages and some tearful phone calls about the frustration she was having. But Megan hung on to her little mustard seed of faith, trusting that there was something good for her. And guys, wow, did she ever get there? What's wild is that Megan actually got a job offer from the FBI, which she thought was her dream job, but something in her intuition told her not to take the job. she became a community service officer, which frankly, I love my CSOs, but in the law enforcement hierarchy, they're not exactly at the top. So the idea of dropping the FBI for such a humble position would blow anybody away. But what's hilarious about that experience is that actually Megan found her place and she built a niche for herself in intelligence operations. And she ended up getting poached by another agency to create her own intelligence unit in her 20s. And she's absolutely crushing it. Every time I talk to her, she's overjoyed. That doesn't mean she doesn't have hard days because working on the justice system is really, really tough. But she's such an inspiring example of what happens when you don't give up on yourself and you keep betting on yourself and you decide that you want to craft and create your own career that is just a pinch me career. It has been such a joy to mentor and coach Megan through these last several years. And from you don't have the experience to you created an amazing intel unit out of thin air, Megan is completely flipping the script and inspiring other entry level professionals to learn to listen to their gut. It's super scary at first, but I promise you are always the very best bet. So check out this episode if you're really frustrated with your job situation right now. You feel like you're not getting any traction. Megan is going to uplift you and encourage you so that you keep going for you.
And like special agents and stuff, you have to know how they think, and they think street smarts. Some of them think book smart, but they're wired to think. How is the criminal thinking? How is he facilitating everything? And I was like, oh, she's kind of right. Like, I don't know nothing about the streets. Like, I didn't even know what like drugs looked like until I got the job later down the road. I was like, that's what heroin looks like. So I was very sheltered. So I was like, okay, whatever. I'm still going to keep applying for these crime analyst positions. I applied to 72 throughout the United States, from the West Coast to the East Coast to the South to the North. 72 no's. In this position, in this literal frame, I had interviewed with the FBI. And I still have the voicemail on my phone because when I was a little girl, my dream was like, I want to work for the FBI. I want to work for the feds. Like, this is what I'm meant to do. And weirdly, it wasn't for an analyst, but it was for an entry-level position that I could then build up to hopefully one day an analyst. And I got the offer. And it's still on my phone to this day because I think it's so cool that the FBI called me, was like, hi, this is blah, 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 blah from HR from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We've been trying to contact you about your job offer. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, this is amazing. Like, I did it. And then that feeling that I had in Hawaii, that feeling of this is not where you're supposed to be. I was like, ooh, but please God, no, like, I really want this. Like, this is where I'm supposed to be. Like, I did it. Like, I got it. And he's like, no. Like, yeah, you got it. Congratulations. But no, like, that's not where you're supposed to be.
Number 6 on the Humble Warrior podcast for the year, we have episode 5, The Humble Surgeon Warrior with Dr. Carolina Solis-Sanabria. Guys, Carolina is such a badass. Yale undergrad, Harvard Medical School, Duke University, Fulbright scholar. I mean, honestly, I feel like an underachiever. She's at the top of the medical food chain right now, and she still experiences her own imposter syndrome, although it's completely shifted for her. So her difficult story actually starts by discovering that the person she thought was her mother was actually her grandmother. So she was adopted by her grandma at a very young age. And so obviously having your entire identity shifted around would create issues for any human being. But then came the wounds of abandonment caused by her parents, right? And unfortunately, for too long, she wore that mantle of achievement, right? She's obviously a very high achiever because she was pushed to achieve in order to be accepted. And one of the symptoms that we know about imposter syndrome is the perfectionism that you are driven to ultimately leads to your burnout. And I know a lot about that. I've blown my career up a couple of times. But the reality is that through the work that I do with my amazing clients, and Carolina is one of them, is that we learn how to understand your personal value system, your life purpose, what your greatest gifts are, and we figure out a way to connect all of those with our head, heart, and behavior so that we can live our best lives. Because when you understand and align yourself with your values and you understand your true identity, you don't need that external validation, and actually magic starts to happen. Ultimately, she got the dream job she always wanted after we started working together. And she figured out how to harness those abandonment wounds to ensure that no patient feels alone or uncared for ever. I love it when she talks about the work that she does now, because it's not just about healing the physical body. She heals the souls of everybody that she comes into contact with so that they know they are not alone. They are never abandoned. They're actually in really great care with the best surgeon in the world. So if you're feeling frustrated because maybe you're struggling with your identity or you're feeling a lot of rejection, this episode is really going to inspire you to keep going. So check out episode 5 of the Humble Warrior podcast, The Humble Surgeon Warrior with Dr. Carolina Solis-Sanabria.
But I started working with you, and I remember things really started to change because I think you were one of the first people that really encouraged me to just be my authentic self, really encouraged me to challenge a lot of my limiting beliefs, which I had a ton of, and I'm still working through a lot of them, but I didn't realize how much of an impact my whole family of origin story had played on me. I had just kept it under wraps. Even just sharing it with other people, it took me a while to finally admit it to friends.
Next up, we've got number 5, episode 56, The Humble Financial Independence Retire Early Warrior with A Purple Life. Guys, this was my one incognito episode. A Purple Life is a digital nomad. She's actually been retired since she was 30 years old. That was 5 years ago, so she's 35 now. She decided that her corporate job just was not hacking it. Does that sound familiar for some of you guys? And decided she wanted to live a different life. She incorporated these very simple tenets around financial independence, retire early, also known as the FIRE movement, and she became financially independent. And what I really wanted to showcase about her story is that so often we feel like the world is the type of place where you go to school, you get a job, you retire when you're in your late 50s, 60s, or 70s, and then you kind of die off, right? But the reality is that if you want, you can become financially independent much earlier. Now, financially independent doesn't necessarily mean not working. It could mean having the ability to choose the job that you want, having that financial freedom to create the life and career that best suits you. And it is super empowering. Being financially independent also gives you the ability to say no to bosses or other things happening at the office that might be unethical or not aligned with your values, rather than being scared to lose your job because you need the money to live, right? And I used to think this was very difficult, but Purple does such a beautiful job of showing how it is completely attainable. And no, you don't have to give up your avocado toast or your lattes. You just have to figure out what's actually important to you versus what isn't actually important to you. So you invest time and money and other resources in the things that do matter, and then you save the finances by not spending them on things that you really don't care about and saving and investing that instead. She gives some great tips on geo-arbitraging, which is the concept of harnessing geographical differences to enhance financial outcomes. So as an example, part of how she got to financial independence was moving to a different part of the country to get a better paying job and to have a lower cost of living. So needless to say, that's going to increase your savings power. And when you can do that, you can invest your money and use compound interest to make even more money while you're sleeping. Another tip that she gave when she was talking about geo-arbitraging was she, at the time of the recording, was actually in England. But when they find that they're starting to exceed their annual budget for travel, she'll go to Mexico or another very cheap part of the world to save a little bit more money. Mexico, she actually mentioned, is a place where she gets her medicine because it's so much cheaper than doing it in the United States. She gives other amazing tips on financial independence, tools that you can harness yourself. If you want to check out the FIRE movement, there is lots of great resources, including Choose FI and the Afford Anything podcast with Paula Pant are two of my favorites. And the Bible of the movement is actually J.L. Collins' book. This is The Simple Path to Wealth, and you can buy that on Amazon. But if the idea of being financially free is encouraging to you, we talk about all the fears that Purple had and how she overcame them. So check out episode 56 of the Humble Warrior podcast with Purple.
Of course. So basically, a lot of people talk about geo arbitrage, which is just going to different countries, because obviously different countries have different costs of living. Myself, I love popping over to Mexico because it's beautiful. First of all, the food's delicious, but also I can usually get my prescriptions that cost $300 in the US for $6. So just going to another country can have huge benefits, for example. But also there is such a thing as domestic geo arbitrage, which is just going within your country. Obviously, there's 50 states in the US. They all vary wildly in their costs of living and everything else they have.
Now we're in the top 5. So we're at number 4, episode 41, The Humble Badass Warrior Advocate with Parissa Behnia. I loved this episode and it actually really challenged me and surprised me. So Parissa is very clear about the fact that humble warriors operate completely differently. And that's part of what makes us feel like we don't fit in or we don't belong. And if you feel like you're the kind of person where you're misunderstood or you're a little bit like a bull in a china shop sometimes, you're going to absolutely love this episode because Parissa shows us how we can start to build our intuition and harness our badassery in a way that is aligned with our values and gifts. She gives such great anecdotes and tips and feedback on how you can understand the signals that your body is sending you so that you're operating fully in alignment with who you were always meant to be. I love the title of her podcast because we are humble badass warriors and she is the ultimate advocate for you. So check out her episode 41 of the Humble Warrior podcast with Parissa Behnia.
They don't know the outcome of every experiment or adventure they embark on, and yet they will still embark on the experiment and the adventure because it is the act of going on that adventure and not necessarily the outcome that is the most important thing. They're not attached to outcomes. They're attached to making the attempt.
Number 3, I've got episode 43, The Humble Spy Warriors with James Lawler and Shawnee Delaney. This was such a special episode for me because this was actually the episode I needed when I was a young baby special agent. And I dedicate this episode to all of my fellow brothers and sisters in the intelligence world who may feel really insecure about their capability or their knowledge. And in this episode, we talk not only about how cool intelligence work can be. And there's lots of really cool stories about catching spies and terrorists and recruiting people to spy against their countries. But we also kind of take a little bit of a left turn and talk about some of those metaphysical elements on how to harness your spirituality to hunt spies and terrorists. And when I was a young agent, I remember feeling like, again, the imposter syndrome. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't qualified, even though I literally had the best training in the world on counterintelligence operations. But I still felt incapable of doing the work. And what I wish I had known back then was that intelligence work is an art, much like many of your fields if you're not in the intelligence space. And ultimately, it's not about a prescription or a to-do list on how to get to success. It's like you being Picasso if you want to be. You can be the very best at what you do, but what's important is for you to understand how you do it in your own unique way. And so we have a couple of clips for you to check out, but ultimately these folks are the best in the business. James was on the verge of actually being fired from the CIA initially because he could not recruit an asset. So an asset is the CIA's way of saying an informant or a source. But then in a moment of weakness, he became one of the best in the CIA, having success that is still written about and discussed today, decades after he retired. And Shawnee herself was one of James's students, actually. And James has trained many, many intelligence agents over the years. And he said Shawnee was his very best. She intuitively had the skills and gifts that were required to be one of the best informant managers. And you can see through their interactions just how powerful their relationship is. Shawnee actually has a really interesting background. And she talks about growing up in a home that was a little bit woo. Like her parents were very much kind of hippie-ish. And you wouldn't normally equate that type of lifestyle and being woo with success in intelligence operations. But Shawnee and James both talk about how you can harness that metaphysical, that intuition to work for you. So whether you're a spy or not, this is a really cool episode to check out. Episode 43, The Humble Spy Warriors with James Lawler and Shawnee Delaney.
In fact, I've got a list of 10 things what makes a successful case officer. And Shawnee already addressed one of them, and it's number one on my list, and that's natural curiosity. I'm curious about people. After this program, Alani, I want to ask you some personal questions just because I'm curious about you. And then that causes you to do the second thing, which is listen to people. You don't recruit people when you're talking. You recruit people when you're listening. And so having a keen listening ability and letting them talk. People sometimes ask me, Jim, was it difficult to defend your cover? I said, no, not really, because frankly, most people aren't interested in me. They're interested in themselves. And that's one place where our interests converge because I'm interested in them too. And so I let them talk, and they love to talk about themselves.
And as I got older, I could feel energy and special connections with people. I had a cousin who lived in a very far away area. It was back in the old days where there's no caller ID. It was just like the rotary phone. And I could, every time he called, which was twice a year, I would know it was him calling. Jim and I actually have that connection. So it's not just with assets. I think a lot of people feel that with certain people in their lives, and it's because they're tapped into the energy of that other person. And so being able to have that empathy allows you more so to tap into the energy of that person that you're working with. And I think that's really super important.
Number 2, we've got episode 14, The Humble Real Estate Warrior with Jesse Stanton. Guys, there is this one-liner that Jesse has in this episode that I still tell people about. Jesse and I actually have a lot more in common than we initially realized. We're both in the Air Force. Jesse actually works on F-22s, which is the super secret fighter aircraft, and it's really sexy, and it does all kinds of cool, super classified things. But Jesse was ready to burn it all to the ground to bet on himself. And at one point, a Fulbright colonel sits him down and tries to give him this pep talk to say, but you're giving up a $700,000 pension. And in his mind, Jesse was like, I'm trying to make $700,000 a month, bro. Which just goes to show that so often the mindset that we have is thinking way too small. And so Jesse has gone on, he left active duty, and now he has an incredible real estate portfolio, and he teaches other people how to build their own badass real estate portfolios. And he actually does it by using other people's money, other people's risk. There's very little leverage that he has actually in doing his business, and he gets to do it with joy. You guys are going to see his energy is so incredible. And so if you're struggling between the W-2 job versus entrepreneurship, this is such a great episode to consider and maybe shift your perspective on what's possible for you. W-2 jobs are really safe and comfortable, right? You have a guaranteed amount of money coming in, and you know that that's very reliable. And for some people, that's really comfortable. But if you feel like you were meant for something more, I would really encourage you to listen to this episode. If nothing else, just to be inspired and think outside the box about what's possible for you. Because the reality is that, guys, we live in America. And I'm incredibly thankful that this country means you can come here with nothing and become a billionaire. A lot of countries in the world do not operate that way, where you don't have any power to change your circumstances. So honestly, as someone who has deployed, and I'm a 3rd-generation service member in my family, I come from a long line of warriors who want to serve and protect and uplift life. People are very gracious in thanking me for my service, but the true thank you to me is you living your best, most badass life. And I know the same is true for Jesse as well, because he's a teacher at heart as well. So whether it's real estate that you're interested in, or you just want a completely different mindset to imagine what's possible for you, check out episode 14 with the humble real estate warrior, Jesse Stanton.
So I was an instructor. So we had a team come up from Shepherd Air Force Base to evaluate us. And part of that team was a retired colonel. Somehow or another, my name got brought up that I was getting out. At the time, I did a year in the reserves. So I did 14 active duty and a year in the reserves. And then he sat me aside while he was there, and he introduced himself, and he said, hey, I heard you're getting out. And he said, basically, it was like, "Are you stupid? Like, what are you doing? He didn't say that. He didn't say that, but that was like where he was going with, like, you've invested all this time, dude." And he said, most people on average make about $600,000 over the course of their lifetime from their retirement. I've never checked the math or anything, but I've never forgotten that number. And in my head, I wanted to be like, I'm trying to make 600 grand a month. But how do you tell somebody like that? How do you tell somebody like that who spent an entire lifetime justifying why they themselves shouldn't or can't go do something like that? All of this to say, through feelings of feeling like an imposter, went through feelings of feeling like a failure, like I was facing backlash from people at work. I was facing backlash from people that I worked with. I was facing backlash from my supervisor. I was facing backlash from retired colonels. I was facing backlash from family. Like, they're like, "Jesse, what do you do?" Like, for those of you guys that don't know, you do 20 years in the military. That's guaranteed retirement for the rest of your life. There's medical. Getting out at 14 years was like, what are you doing with your life, man? So being able to cast that vision of what I thought I could do or what the potential was, people just wouldn't see it. And it's been like that my entire life. So being able to actually get out and execute to the caliber that which I think I'm capable of.
We made it to number 1. And guys, I was really kind of surprised, although I didn't really know what to expect. But the number 1 most viewed episode of the Humble Warrior podcast was actually episode 40, The Humble 2x2 Spiritual Warriors with Sheri Walker and Rhonda Grillo. Now, a little bit of context. The 2x2s are a church. Actually, guys, they're a cult. And they're called the 2x2s because in the Bible, it talks about Jesus sending out the disciples 2x2. So this church actually doesn't have physical church buildings that they go to. They send pastors out in pairs, and they stay in people's houses. And as a result of that, obviously, there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of spiritual and sexual abuse to happen, unfortunately. And so there's been a massive movement. There's actually a really big FBI case open right now. And this is international, by the way, you guys. Where it was uncovered that there was some horrific child abuse happening within this church for decades. And Sheri and Rhonda are 2 of the most incredible advocates that I've ever met. I've had the incredible privilege of working with survivors and advocates for over 20 years at this point. And as an investigator, I'm trauma informed, which means that it's all about giving the survivors the power and authority to decide how much or how little they want to interact with the investigation. But deep down, selfish Alani just wants to tell these individuals how powerful they are, how much they matter, and that their story could really inspire other people to get out of dangerous situations or advocate for themselves or save other people. But that's not my place, right? So anytime I find advocates who are willing to speak up, it is just so refreshing, and I'm so encouraged. Now, we do talk a lot about Christianity because that is the root of this particular sect of religion. And ultimately, what these women say is that when we feel weakest is when God is strongest. And I 100% believe that. And, one of the things that I like to highlight as well is that oftentimes if you're the survivor of abuse, and it doesn't have to be sexual, it can be any kind of abuse, it's so easy to feel alone and isolated in your suffering. But because I've done this work for so long, I literally did the calculation. So it's 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 to 10 boys have been sexually abused, which means that I ran the numbers. It's between 60 and 70 million Americans are survivors of child sex abuse. And that is an army. And so it can be very, very difficult to shine a light on your darkest experiences. But Sheri and Rhonda are really powerful examples that when you feel called and follow the intuitive prompting to share your stories, true magic can happen. And this was the number 1 episode by far. It was super wild to see how many downloads it got. And the hardest parts of Rhonda's story, which have to do with her own abusive past, actually made her really sympathetic to other people. So that's a really powerful example to me of how the thing that you think is your weakness is actually the thread that's going to connect you and allow you to be the most powerful that you possibly can be. She now is an advocate for survivors because she knows their pain. And she doesn't just do this in the United States, she does it internationally as well. I've had the incredible privilege of working with both of these women. Their survivor groups are filled with such badass, incredible humans from all races, all nationalities. Sheri, actually, I really hold her dear to my heart as well because she shares the story of how she and I met, and it was all intuitive. And I just want to really quick tee it up because I was speaking at a conference which has its whole own God story that I'm going to tell another time. But she went to this event, kind of didn't really want to. One of those stories, that's how it starts, right? And she's sitting there and she's hearing me talk, and she'd never heard of imposter syndrome. And her intuition said, go talk to her. And I'm standing at my table selling my book and, the other things. And she comes up to me and she's very introverted. And we strike up this conversation and we connect later on. And it wasn't until many months later that we were both able to share what was happening behind the scenes in terms of how God, that's how we define our spirituality, how God had worked in both of our lives to lead us to that moment. So there's a lot I think that this episode illustrates for anybody who feels maybe abandoned by their faith or they're struggling with their spirituality. There's actually a lot that happens behind the scenes that you don't know about. But I truly believe that all things are working out in your favor and that really this game of life, you can't lose. The question is, how do you want to play it? And so because of these beautiful interactions, they've led to quite a few professional collaborations over the years. And the power ultimately that Sheri has is her ability to hear God speak to her and take one tiny wobbly step forward in trust and surrender. And so whether you are a survivor of these horrific crimes and you just want to hear encouragement from incredible women who are leading a movement to stop these events from happening and to hold people accountable, you're going to want to check out these clips of both Sheri and Rhonda. They are so inspiring to me. They're personal heroes of mine. And I'm just so tickled that they were the #1 episode.
So I think the whole experience was because of my own childhood abuse. I was sexually abused at 3 different ages by 3 different people, 3 different experiences, on top of having a father who was a rager, very emotionally and physically abusive. And so it's like God is taking those experiences and using me to advocate not only as a survivor myself, but for others, because those experiences made me very empathetic to people in pain, but also very strong, like fearless.
I don't remember a lot about what she said about imposter syndrome because I was focused on CSA. And one of the other speakers there told her experience with domestic violence. And I'm getting goosebumps just saying this, but I just like, oh, wow. Okay. That's why that little voice said, I need to be at this conference. So then it was a lunch break after you presented, and I would never go and talk to a keynote speaker at any conference, but it's like, you need to go talk to Alani. So I did. It was immediate connection, and you told me that you've put a lot of Christians in jail, and then you gave me a big hug, and it's wow.
So guys, oh my gosh, 10 episodes. We have a whole year worth of other episodes that I'm just blown away. I can't believe we're a year in. I clearly see that you guys really loved the guest episode. So I'm going to make sure I do even more of those. And honestly, some lessons learned for me are my perspective shifted on quite a few things by doing this podcast. I learned a lot from the guests myself as well, and they really challenged me in some cases to view something a little bit differently. But the reality is that your imposter voice isn't something to fear or hide from. It actually has the seeds to launch you into your greatest joy and success. So if you were inspired by any of these guests that I mentioned, please make sure to go back and watch or listen to the full episode on Spotify or YouTube. So guys, what did you think about season 1? What did you like about it? What do you want to see more of? What kinds of guests do you want to hear from? Do you want me to do a Q&A? Please drop a note in the comments, or you can DM me at Mighty Sparrow Coaching on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. And remember, humble warriors, The world needs who you were made to be. I'm so stoked to bring season 2 to you next. We're not going to stop. We're going to keep going. But thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining me on this amazing first year journey to discover how your imposter points you to how to unlock your greatest power. I love you guys, and I'll see you soon. If you enjoyed this episode and would like some help overcoming your imposter syndrome, check out the free life purpose exercise on my website and subscribe to my blog. If you already know what your life purpose is and are ready to crush or harness your imposter syndrome, then you're going to love my best-selling book, The Least of Us: How Your Weakness Points to Your Greatest Power, available on Amazon and all major book retailers. Or you can hit me up at alani@mightysparrowcoaching.com to discuss private coaching or corporate and government training. That's ALANI@mightysparrowcoaching.com. Listen, there's only ever been one you, and there will only ever be one you. And you have a specific gift to give that the world desperately needs. Don't let your self-doubt be the thing preventing you from living your most joyful and impactful life. Until next time, I'm always cheering you on.